Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Chris with Inside the U, back here with another 10 takeaways and tidbits from the second spring practice. There's a lot to get to based on the conversations we had after practice with head coach Manny Diaz and four players, Corey Flagg, Jafari Harvey, Tyler Van Dyke, and Don Chaney Jr. So let's get right to it. My first takeaway is Avantae Williams is still impressing. Amari Carter said yesterday at the first practice he was flying around, and then today Manny Diaz said that Avantae is doing a great job playing 100 miles per hour and is doing a good job really being active out there. And one thing that Diaz said was he kind of compared him to Jalen Phillips, just in the sense from a year ago, Jalen was coming off a season where he wasn't able to practice much like Avantae. He made sure not to say that he's expecting that kind of a season from Jalen out of Avantae, but basically kind of a similar situation, not knowing what to expect, and that the spring can be huge for Avantae. So I think that's a very good sign, because I know a lot of people are excited about what can Avantae bring to the team as a safety, highest regarded recruit from a couple years ago. So definitely keep your eye on Avantae for the spring. My second takeaway is Don Chaney Jr. He's very excited for the spring. If you remember, last year he was not able to participate in the 4 spring practices because of an injury. So this year he's able to take in all the practices. He's really looking forward to it and developing from last year. Speaking of last year, I was able to ask him about his yards, his 20-yard runs. He only had 3 of them last year. I was kind of curious what he made of that number, if he felt like it should be more. And he's a guy with some speed, so I think that number can improve moving forward. And one thing he said in his reply was that he's really been working on watching film with running backs coach Eric Hickson, who is really pressing the issue on film. If he sees any missed holes, he's making sure that Chaney and the other running backs are making sure they see where they missed it. Maybe they could pick up more yards. I think that's really good. Another thing that Don mentioned is his squat numbers. If you guys have been paying attention to his career from high school, he's always been one of these weight room freaks that's really good in the weight room, and he said he can squat 555 pounds right now, and that number might be able to improve as he continues to move forward in the off season. And noted they haven't done their final testing, but he thinks his other numbers will be good as well. So my third takeaway is linebacker Corey Flagg. I think he is a very interesting person to watch for in the spring as he looks to compete for more playing time in his second season. So there's some numbers that stand out to me with Corey that he noted. So he arrived at Miami 244 pounds. He said he's down to 232. Also noted that they did the body composition test last week, and he was 22% when he first arrived at body fat percent, and now he's already down to 13. So he's feeling leaner. And the big thing that Corey said that he's been working on in the off season, basically things that, when Miami's not having their workouts and things on the weekends, he's been taking some boxing classes to kind of just stay fit and work on some things. But one thing he wants to really improve on in the spring and in the summer heading into his second season is he really wants to work on his speed. And I do feel like that's an aspect that Corey can continue to work on. He feels like he's got good enough speed to get to the sidelines, but basically feels like at Miami, his speed definitely needs to improve to be one of those speed linebackers and have more success. So I like that Corey has a good understanding of where he is as a player, and he's already made strides on improving. I think those are great signs for a young player, and definitely keep your eye on Corey as he continues to move forward in the spring, because I know the coaches really like him. They're really interested in seeing how he does with his development. My fourth takeaway is a quick one, just with Jafari Harvey. Didn't go into too much detail, but basically just a quick tidbit is he can power clean 310 pounds. He feels like that's an explosive attribute that he has, and that is his best attribute as far as a defensive end, that he's got that explosion off the edge, and maybe an example of that is that power clean number. So just a real quick fourth note on Jafari Harvey. Moving on to number 5. This is a great number because it's Keyshawn Smith, number 5, the wide receiver, second year. I asked Manny, because Manny mentioned in practice that Keyshawn was a guy that stood out in the first 2 practices. So when I was able to ask a question in the interview session, I was kind of curious just what is he doing that's impressing. And then also last year we saw it in games where he showed flashes at wide receiver with just a couple catches and kind of drawing penalties, but it's just kind of curious how he did in practices. And the one thing that Coach Diaz said, and I think this is great, first off, it's his speed, right? That's what stands out in terms of Keyshawn's ability. And I've spoken to Keyshawn's trainer back in San Diego a few times to see how he's doing with his development, and that's certainly his speed is there. It's a high quality thing. But Coach D has mentioned, and I think this is even bigger maybe than his speed, although you guys know I love the speed, is that he's doing a great job of catching the ball in traffic, and today was an example of that. Coach D has mentioned that he had a big catch today, but did note that they don't have full pads on, just helmets, so maybe the defensive backs eased up a little bit, but still, Keyshawn is showing that ability to catch the ball in traffic, and I know that you guys remember last season, Coach D has mentioned that multiple times, that being an issue, that they're not winning those 50-50 balls, and D'Eriq King is going to throw the ball to his receivers, give them opportunities to make plays, and if Keyshawn's a guy that can make catches in traffic, in addition to his speed, I think you've got a good receiver to count on, even for 2021. So keep your eye on Keyshawn, number 5 wide receiver. My 6th takeaway is going back to Tyler Van Dyke, because we talked about him quite a bit in that first practice. But Tyler spoke to the media. This is his first time speaking to the media. He looked very comfortable in talking and explaining about certain things. He's really excited about the spring, the opportunity he has to gain a lot of reps. So that's key with his development. And basically with that, there's been a coach that has told him about the confidence, that he really wants Tyler to play with confidence, have confidence when he's out there. Feels like that's an important trait for all players to have. And I agree, and I understand what you're saying. It's not that Tyler's not confident in his abilities, but really carry himself with the confidence to make plays each and every day in practice that they're out there. So watch for Tyler to continue to improve in that sense. Another note on Tyler is that he said he got to Miami, or he finished last season at Miami at 210 pounds, but already he's up to 225, which includes 6.5 pounds of increased increased muscle. So pounds of muscle. So those are some good numbers for Tyler, and it shows just based on the pictures and the video clips that we've seen, he does look a little bit bigger than what we saw last year. So 225 pounds, that's a good size for Tyler, and just once again, he's getting a lot of reps in the spring. So it's definitely going to be one to keep your eye on how he's doing, performing, and those things. And I do have another note on Tyler later I want to get to, but I want to get to some other players. Kind of going back to Corey Flagg is my 7th note. And Coach Diaz, when he was asked about players that are doing well, he mentioned Corey as a guy that has done well in the first 2 practices. And I think that's a good sign, because once again, he's a player to watch for, but also just because there are players to watch, you want to make sure that they're performing at a high level and doing well in practices, because you can have opinions and forecasts or projections or predictions of what's going to happen. But when a guy like Corey Flagg, who you expect a lot from in the spring, that, making improvements on his progress, is actually doing that, that's certainly a good sign. And Coach Diaz mentioned him, singled him out as a guy that's doing well in the first 2 days of practices. Once again, a good sign for Corey, because he's in a competition there at middle linebacker. Even though Miami returns Bradley Jennings, who started all the games last year at middle linebacker, I still think Corey can make that push, certainly for playing time, but certainly Corey's looking to take away that starting spot. So we'll see how he continues to improve. My 8th takeaway or tidbit of the second spring practice is Jeremiah Payton. Jeremiah is a guy that certainly has shown flashes at practice. He caught 5 passes last year in limited role, and he posted last year during the season that he was dealing with an injury, a picture of it. And basically I asked Coach Diaz for an update on Jeremiah, because he was not one of those guys that he mentioned before spring ball started as an injury guy. But anyways, he said that Jeremiah is a guy that they're not ruling out for the spring, but he is dealing with injury recovery, and they do hope to get him back out there at some point during the spring. So I think that's a good sign that they're not ruling him out, and that there's a chance he can get back out there, because I think reps for Jeremiah Payton is certainly important in his development. Also, all of those receivers, it's important to be out there because there's a lot of competition, and then they don't want to fall back too far behind their competition. And certainly getting back out there would be key for Jeremiah in his development once again. So my 9th one, going back to Tyler Van Dyke, and Tyler's is really putting a lot of focus on studying film. He's been working with the UM staff, and there's 2 NFL guys that he's been watching film on. One of them is Jared Goff. With Goff, they're really working on his footwork, making sure he's paying attention to how Jared works on those things, and Tyler's taking a keen eye to that. So I think that's a good sign. Also, real quick, Don Chaney Jr. mentioned he made it a point to say Tyler Van Dyke is a beast and he can run. He said, there might be some questions about it, but basically he just wanted to come right out and say that Tyler can run. So definitely feels like he could do it. And Tyler did mention he feels like he could do a little RPO action, even though maybe not quite as good, or he called it the zone read actually, but not quite as good as De'Aaron King, but he still feels like he can get some things done in that game. The second player that he's been watching in the NFL is Patrick Mahomes. And it's not necessarily about the deep passes that Mahomes makes, or even necessarily the creativity that Mahomes shows to be effective in the NFL, but the basic thing is Mahomes and the Chiefs really do a good job of their checkdowns. And so Tyler's really paying attention to that, going to the tight ends and the running backs, and even used a guy like Tyreek Hill as an example, that they do checkdowns with him. Okay, and my 10th and final takeaway from the second spring practice is Coach Shoop. He's a defensive analyst that they brought in the offseason, and they are mentioning him quite a bit. The players are, Coach Diaz mentioned him. Basically, he's a quality control defensive analyst. He's really just basically helping out with a lot of different things, and I think it sounds like it's a great hire in the sense that he's able to help and contribute. He's a guy with a lot of experience, and the players, once again, Coach Diaz are really liking the contributions he's making. So it's a good sign, because anytime you can bring on additional help to the staff, it's a positive. So those are my 10 takeaways and tidbits. Thanks to everybody for watching. Stay locked into InsideTheU.com for more coverage of the Miami Hurricanes, complete coverage. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet so you don't miss any more videos on the Hurricanes. Thanks again. Thank you for watching, and take care.